Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has not given up on the idea of installing a puppet government in Ukraine. He would prefer to end the war against the Ukrainian state in the same way he did in Chechnya, when he persuaded warlord Akhmad Kadyrov to defect to his side and take control of the embattled region. The Financial Times reports, citing a source who discussed the war with Putin late last year. The article states that after 3 years of full-scale invasion, the Kremlin dictator has not backed down from his tough demands, which threaten to destroy the current European security architecture and effectively turn Ukraine into a failed state. According to observers, US President Donald Trump openly sided with the aggressor country by proposing to hold talks in Riyadh with representatives of the Russian Federation while excluding the participation of Kyiv and its European allies. During these talks, Trump accepted many of the Kremlin's theses. US officials added that the Saudi talks were meant to be an attempt to gauge Russia's readiness to end the war, but the US did not want the process to drag on while the Kremlin continued to wage war. Journalists point out that the American side did not report what concessions the Russian dictator might make in exchange for the fact that the Trump administration has already ruled out the possibility of Ukraine's membership in NATO or the return of Ukrainian territories under occupation. According to a former senior Kremlin official, Putin may make tougher demands in potential talks than he did in the spring of 2022, when he insisted on Ukraine not joining the North Atlantic Alliance and reducing the Ukrainian army. The Trump administration's actions have been criticized in Europe. European officials are shocked by the US's intentions to normalize relations with Russia, especially after the US president's representatives said the US security guarantees are not forever, and that Russia is no longer an existential threat to Europe. A European official who spoke to reporters stressed that given the failures of past attempts to reset relations with Moscow, Europe does not trust Russia. We need to continue to apply economic and military pressure, he added.
UK Defense Secretary reacted to US President Donald Trump's recent comments about Ukraine starting the war, saying that Ukrainians have been fighting for their freedom and that maximum pressure must be applied to Russia. According to Associated Press, his comments came as a response to relations between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Trump deteriorating rapidly Wednesday, as Zelensky said Trump was living in a Russian-made disinformation space. Trump called Zelensky a dictator without elections, in comments that were sure to complicate efforts to end the war. The Trump administration has started charting a new course, reaching out to Russia and pushing for a peace deal. A shaken Europe is grappling with the new US course under Trump and worrying about Washington's long-standing security guarantees to the continent. Speaking during a visit to Kherson, Norway, near the Russian border, Healy stressed that Norway is NATO's front line and the region serves as a reminder that Russia is a threat well beyond Ukraine. Tor Sandvik, Norwegian Defense Secretary, said both countries plan to work together with the US to further protect NATO's northern flank. Both defense chiefs insisted that their support for Ukraine remains unwavering and they're working towards ensuring the country is in the strongest possible position going into any talks.
3 years ago, one country illegally invaded another, and since then the Ukrainians have been fighting for their freedom, they've been fighting for their future, and they still are. So whilst all the focus may be on talks, not even negotiations, our concern as defence ministers is that we're not jeopardising the peace by forgetting about the war. And our job as defence ministers is to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position going into any talks. And that means continuing to step up the military aid that we in Europe, alongside we argue to the States, needs to be maintained, because the maximum pressure on Putin is going to mean the maximum chance that he will negotiate seriously. This is NATO's front line. It's Norway's border with Russia, but what you and we have done as nations over the decades is to stand together defending NATO's northern flank. And at this time, when our partnership is growing closer and deeper with every day, this visit, this region, reminds us that Russia is a threat well beyond Ukraine, and reminds us that Russian aggression is not confined to Ukraine.
Russia has suffered a lot in Ukraine. They lost a lot of young people, but still the nukes and the Northern Fleet is intact, and it's still a threat towards our societies and our countries. So bringing John up here is also an opportunity for himself to see the eyes and the ears and the capacities we have here to look after the Russians. And as John also mentioned, we are going to cooperate wider and deeper together, and also together with the Americans, because NATO in the north is a topic for all the three of us.
We work together in this area of the High North and the North Atlantic, and we also work together supporting Ukraine. So together our two countries lead the Maritime Capability Coalition, putting some of the maritime weaponry into the hands of the Ukrainians and building up, importantly, their strength to guarantee their own security in future.
Donald Trump pushed back Tuesday against Ukraine's objections to being excluded from talks between the US and Russia in Saudi Arabia aimed at ending the war in eastern Ukraine. According to Associated Press, he also seemed to suggest that Ukraine was to blame for a war that began only after Russia invaded that country. Speaking to reporters from his Mar-a-Lago estate, Trump said, "Today I heard, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it." Trump didn't mention that Russia has also failed to end the war it began when it invaded its neighbor. A half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, Trump said, echoing his frequent claim that he could have prevented the Russian invasion. Trump said he thought he had a good chance to end Russia's war in Ukraine, but bristled at suggestions that the US and Russia had begun negotiations to end fighting occurring without Ukraine playing a role.
Do you have any message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their sides. You have those magnificent golden domes that are shattered, will never be replaced. You can't replace them. 1,000-year-old domes.